Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. I never thought I'd be the guy with a Tinder horror story. I always figured I was too boring, too normal, to attract any real weirdness. But hey, life's got a way of throwing curveballs, right? It all started with a blurry profile pic and a bio that just said, "Looking for adventure." Red flag number one, I guess. But my brain wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders at the time. I was fresh off a breakup and feeling like I needed to inject some spontaneity into my existence. Adventure sounded good. Her name was Sarah, or at least that's what her profile said. We matched, exchanged a few messages, nothing too crazy, just the usual getting to know you small talk. She seemed into hiking, which I was also into. We talked about our favorite trails and decided to hit up this spot in the state park about an hour outside the city. It was supposed to have amazing views. The day of the hike, I was a little nervous. I hadn't been on a date in forever, and meeting someone from Tinder always felt a bit like stepping into the unknown. I pulled up to the park entrance, and there she was, leaning against her car. She looked different than her photos, not necessarily in a bad way, just different. Taller, maybe, and her eyes were this really intense shade of green. We started up the trail, making small talk about the weather and the scenery. It was a pretty strenuous hike, lots of uphill climbs and rocky terrain. Sarah seemed to be handling it fine, though, even in these beat-up old boots she was wearing. As we got further into the woods, the other hikers started to thin out. Eventually, it was just us. That's when things started to get a little off. She started asking me really personal questions, stuff I wouldn't normally share with someone I'd just met. Questions about my family, my deepest fears, my dreams for the future. It felt like she was trying to dig something out of me, and it made me uncomfortable. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but she kept circling back to the same intense questions. Then, she started talking about the woods. Not in a casual, "Oh, isn't nature beautiful" kind of way, but in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She talked about the ancient spirits that lived in the trees, about the power of the earth, about secrets buried deep within the forest. It was weird, new agey stuff, and it didn't really fit with the hiking enthusiast vibe she'd given off in her profile. We reached a clearing with a view that was supposed to be breathtaking, but all I could feel was a growing sense of unease. The air felt heavy, and the woods seemed to close in around us. Sarah walked to the edge of the cliff, staring out at the horizon with this strange, almost trance-like look in her eyes. "This place is special," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a place of transformation." I didn't like the way she said that. Suddenly, she turned to me, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that bordered on manic. "I need you to do something for me," she said. "What?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to trust me," she said, taking a step closer. "I need you to let go." "Let go? Let go of what? My common sense? My sanity?" She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It looked old, like something you'd find in an antique shop. She opened it to a random page and started reading aloud in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded like chanting, and as she spoke, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves and creating this eerie, unsettling sound. I felt like I was in a horror movie. She closed the book and looked at me, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Now," she said, "we have to make an offering." "An offering?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "What kind of offering?" She smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a jolt of fear through my body. "Something precious," she said. "Something we can both give." That's when I knew I had to get out of there. I told her I wasn't feeling well, that I needed to head back down the trail. She didn't argue, but she didn't seem happy about it either. She just stared at me with those unsettling green eyes, a hint of something dark lurking beneath the surface. I practically ran back down the trail, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I didn't even look back. I drove home in a daze, replaying the whole bizarre encounter in my head. What was that ritual? What did she want from me? And what kind of offering was she talking about? I blocked her number, deleted her from Tinder, and tried to erase the whole incident from my memory. But it's hard to forget something like that. Every time I think about going hiking again, I get this weird, uneasy feeling. And every time I see someone with intense green eyes, I can't help but wonder if it's her, looking for her next offering. I still go on dating apps, but I'm a lot more cautious now. I do my research, check their social media, and always meet in a public place for the first date. I guess you could say I learned my lesson. Adventure might sound appealing, but sometimes it's better to stick with the boring, normal life. You never know what kind of weirdness is lurking just around the corner. And trust me, you don't want to find out. The air in my dorm room hung thick and heavy with the smell of microwaved ramen and unwashed laundry. I swiped mindlessly through Tinder, trying to find a distraction from the mountain of textbooks threatening to bury me alive. Honestly, I wasn't even really looking for anything serious. Maybe just someone to grab a coffee with. Vent about organic chemistry. You know, the usual college stuff. I saw a guy, Liam, decent looking, a little outdoorsy judging by the pictures of him hiking. He seemed normal enough. We matched, and he messaged me instantly. He was smooth, I'll give him that. A little too smooth, maybe, in retrospect. We chatted for a few days, mostly about classes and our favorite local bars. He suggested we meet up at this new coffee shop downtown. Said it had a cool vibe. I figured why not? I was bored, and he seemed harmless enough. The coffee shop was definitely unique. It was tucked away on a side street I didn't even know existed, all dark wood and exposed brick. The kind of place that screams artisanal and charges $8 for a latte. Liam was already there, sitting at a corner table. He looked just like his pictures, maybe a little taller. He stood up when I walked over, gave me a hug that lingered a beat too long. The conversation started off pretty normal. We talked about our majors, complained about professors, the usual first date stuff. But then things started to get weird. He asked me about my family, where I grew up, what my parents did for work. Normal questions, sure, but he asked them with this intense, unwavering stare that made me feel like I was being interrogated. He then asked me if I believed in destiny. I laughed it off, said I was more of a science kind of person. He didn't laugh. He just kept staring at me, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the coffee shop. He started talking about how everything happens for a reason, how we were brought together for a purpose. It was giving me serious cult vibes. I tried to steer the conversation back to something lighter, but he wouldn't let it go. He kept talking about this greater plan, how he had been searching for someone like me. I was starting to feel really uncomfortable. I made an excuse about having to study and said I should probably head back to campus. He insisted on walking me back. I didn't want him to, but I was too nervous to say no. The walk was silent, and I felt his eyes burning a hole in the side of my head. When we got to my dorm, he stopped me at the entrance. He grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He said, "I know this is sudden, but I feel a connection with you. A very powerful one. I think we're meant to be together." I stammered something about needing to get inside and pried my hand away. I practically ran into the building, not stopping until I was safely locked in my room. I blocked his number and unmatched him on Tinder. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door, feeling like I had just dodged a bullet. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, I started getting these weird messages on social media. Anonymous accounts with no profile pictures, sending me cryptic messages about destiny and fate. I ignored them, figuring it was just some internet trolls. But they kept coming, day after day, each one more unsettling than the last. Then, things started happening in real life. I would find little notes tucked under my dorm room door, quoting things Liam had said on our date. I started seeing him everywhere, lurking in the shadows, watching me from across the quad. I would walk faster, try to avoid him, but he always seemed to be there. I told my roommate, Sarah, about it. She thought I was being paranoid, that I was just letting one bad date get to me. But I knew something was wrong. I felt like I was being stalked. One night, I was walking back from the library late. The campus was deserted, the only sound the crunch of my footsteps on the pavement. I saw him standing under a streetlight, waiting for me. My heart leaped into my throat. I wanted to turn and run, but I was frozen in place. He started walking towards me, a slow, deliberate pace. His eyes were glowing in the dim light, and he had this strange smile on his face. He said, "I've been waiting for you. I knew you couldn't stay away." I finally found my voice. I told him to leave me alone, that I was going to call the police. He laughed. "The police can't help you. This is bigger than them. This is about fate." He reached out to grab me, but I managed to duck out of the way. I ran, as fast as I could, back towards the dorms. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps getting closer. I didn't stop running until I was back in my room, slamming the door and locking it behind me. Sarah was asleep, but I woke her up, hysterical. I told her everything, about the messages, the notes, the stalking. This time she believed me. We called campus security, who took my statement and promised to increase patrols around the dorms. But I knew that wasn't enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that Liam was still out there, watching me, waiting for his chance. I started carrying pepper spray everywhere I went. I avoided walking alone at night. I changed my social media settings to private. I basically lived in a state of constant anxiety. The situation reached its peak a few weeks later. I was studying late in the library when I got a text from Sarah. She said there was someone knocking on our door, asking for me. She didn't open it, but she said the person sounded like Liam. I panicked. I knew I couldn't go back to the dorm. I called campus security again, but they said it would take them at least 15 minutes to get to the library. I felt trapped. Then I remembered the old maintenance tunnels that ran under the campus. I had heard stories about them, how they were abandoned and forgotten. I figured it was my best chance of escaping. I snuck out of the library and found the entrance to the tunnels. It was a dark, creepy hole in the ground, hidden behind a row of bushes. I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and climbed inside. The tunnels were even worse than I imagined. They were damp and musty, filled with cobwebs and rats. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. I stumbled through the darkness, using my phone as a flashlight, praying that I wouldn't get lost. I could hear noises behind me, faint at first, but growing louder. Footsteps. Liam. He had followed me into the tunnels. I ran faster, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from him. The tunnels twisted and turned, branching off in different directions. I took a random turn, hoping to lose him. I kept running, until I finally reached a dead end. I was trapped. I turned around, bracing myself for what was to come. Liam appeared at the end of the tunnel, his face illuminated by the beam of his flashlight. He was smiling. He said, "I knew you couldn't hide from me forever. We're meant to be together." Just then, I heard another noise, a loud clang coming from behind Liam. Campus security. They had found us. Liam turned around, startled. He hesitated for a moment, then ran in the opposite direction, disappearing into the darkness. Campus security helped me out of the tunnels. They eventually caught Liam a few days later. He was charged with stalking and harassment. I never saw him again. The whole thing was a nightmare. It took me a long time to feel safe again. I deleted Tinder and swore off online dating for good. You really don't know who's on the other end of that screen. What started as a harmless swipe turned into the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I don't think I'll ever look at coffee shops the same way again. My thumbs hovered over the screen, debating deleting Tinder altogether. It was draining. All the swiping, the awkward conversations that fizzled out after 3 messages, the guys who clearly hadn't read my profile. I was so over it. But then, a profile popped up that made me pause. Liam. He had this goofy, genuine smile, and his bio said he loved hiking and old movies. Seemed pretty normal. Maybe, just maybe, this could be different. We matched, obviously, and started chatting. He was actually really funny. Not just the generic, hey beautiful nonsense I usually got. We talked about our favorite movies, our families, even our dumbest childhood stories. He seemed real. So, when he suggested we grab coffee, I actually felt excited instead of the usual dread. We met at this little cafe downtown, the kind with mismatched chairs and way too many plants. He was even cuter in person. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He even laughed at my truly terrible puns. I thought, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe I finally found a decent guy on this app. A few dates in, things were going great. We went to a concert, walked around this cool art fair, and even had a picnic in the park. Liam was always a gentleman, opening doors, paying for things, but not in a way that felt forced or old-fashioned. It felt natural. I was starting to really like him. That's when things started to get weird. It started small. He would get strangely quiet when I talked about my friends. If I mentioned hanging out with them, he'd just nod and change the subject. I thought maybe he was insecure. Maybe he felt like he needed to impress them. I brushed it off. Then, there was the time I mentioned my favorite bookstore. It's this tiny place on the edge of town, filled with dusty old books and a really cranky cat. Liam got this weird look on his face and said, "Oh, I know that place. It's interesting." He didn't elaborate, just steered the conversation away from it. But the real red flag popped up during a movie night at my place. I had put on this cheesy rom-com, and halfway through, Liam got up and started pacing. He was visibly agitated, running a hand through his hair and muttering something under his breath. "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned. He stopped pacing and forced a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. Just this movie is giving me a headache. I think I need some fresh air." He went out onto my balcony and stayed there for a good 20 minutes. When he came back in, he was acting completely normal, like nothing had happened. I tried to ask him about it later, but he just said he was tired and needed to go home. After that, I started noticing other oddities. He was always on his phone, texting furiously, but whenever I asked who he was talking to, he'd say it was just his mom. He started canceling dates last minute, claiming he was sick or had family emergencies. He was becoming distant, and I could feel him slipping away. One Saturday, I decided I was going to get to the bottom of it. He had canceled our plans for the evening, saying he had to help his uncle with something. I knew where his uncle lived, so I decided to drive by, just to see if he was actually there. I know, super stalkerish, but I was desperate. I parked down the street from his uncle's house and waited. About an hour later, Liam came out, but he wasn't alone. He was with another woman. They were holding hands and laughing, and he looked happy, happier than I had seen him in weeks. My heart sank. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I wanted to drive over there and confront him, but I couldn't. I was too hurt, too embarrassed. I just drove home and cried. The next day, I texted him, telling him I knew about the other woman and that we were done. He didn't even bother to deny it. He just said he was sorry and that he didn't want to hurt me. Like that made it any better. I blocked him on everything and tried to move on. But the whole thing left me feeling shaken. I couldn't stop thinking about all the little lies, all the weird behaviors I had ignored. How could I have been so blind? A few weeks later, a mutual friend told me something that made my stomach churn. Apparently, Liam had a reputation. He was known for dating multiple women at the same time, stringing them along until he got bored. He was a master manipulator, good at charming people and then disappearing without a trace. I felt so stupid. I had fallen for his act, hook, line, and sinker. The worst part is that, even now, months later, I still think about him sometimes. I wonder if he's still out there, playing the same games with other women. I hope not. I hope someone eventually sees through his facade and calls him out on his crap. But mostly, I hope that I learned my lesson, that I'll be more careful in the future, more aware of the red flags, more trusting of my gut instincts. Because Tinder is a minefield, and sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who seem the most normal. It's hard to trust people these days. And this confirmed it. All I can say is watch out and be smart and safe. It started with a taxidermied squirrel wearing a tiny top hat. That's what drew me to her profile on Tinder. I know. Sounds kinda weird, but I have a soft spot for quirky. Her bio said she collected oddities and worked at an antique shop downtown. Seemed way more interesting than the usual loves to travel and drink wine profile. We matched, and she messaged me almost instantly. Her name was Bethany. We chatted for a few days, and she seemed really cool, maybe a little intense, but definitely cool. We talked about everything from our favorite horror movies to the best dive bars in the city. She had this dark, sarcastic sense of humor that I really dug. So naturally, I asked her out. She suggested meeting at the antique shop where she worked, said it was open late on Fridays. Seemed different, right? And I'm all about different. The shop was called Yesterday's Curiosities. It was tucked away on a side street, the kind you only find if you're actually looking for it. The windows were dusty, filled with mannequin heads wearing vintage hats, creepy porcelain dolls, and stacks of yellowed books. It definitely had that haunted vibe, which, for me, was a plus. Bethany was even prettier in person. She had this long, black hair, piercing blue eyes, and wore a black dress with ripped fishnets. Very Wednesday Addams-esque, which, again, I was totally into. She gave me a tour of the shop, pointing out different items and telling me their stories. Some were legit historical, some were probably made up, but all of them were entertaining. We looked at old medical instruments, weird taxidermy, obviously. She had a lot, and a collection of antique mourning jewelry. The shop was huge, way bigger than it looked from the outside. It was like a maze of dimly lit rooms, each filled with more and more strange stuff. As we got deeper inside, I started to feel a little uneasy. The air was thick with the smell of dust and mothballs, and it was strangely quiet, even for a mostly empty antique shop. We ended up in a back room that Bethany said was her private collection. It was smaller than the other rooms, but even more packed with stuff. There were shelves filled with jars containing what looked like pickled animal parts, old dolls with missing eyes, and a display case filled with antique knives and daggers. "So, what do you think?" she asked, a little too eagerly. "It's impressive," I said, trying not to sound too freaked out. She smiled, a little too wide, and stepped closer to me. "I knew you'd appreciate it. Most people just don't understand." She started talking about her collection, explaining the history of each item in excruciating detail. I tried to pay attention, but I was starting to feel really uncomfortable. Something about the way she was looking at me, like I was another object to be collected, was making my skin crawl. Then she picked up a small, ornate box from a shelf. "This," she said, holding it out to me, "is my most prized possession." The box was made of dark wood, covered in intricate carvings. It looked really old, maybe even ancient. "What's inside?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She just smiled and opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a lock of hair. A long, dark lock of hair. "It's from a very special person," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I had a bad feeling about this. A really bad feeling. "Whose hair is it?" I asked. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Someone who underestimated me," she said. Okay, that was it. Red Flag City. I started backing away slowly. "I think I should probably get going," I said, trying to sound polite but firm. She didn't move. "Oh, don't leave yet," she said. "I was just about to show you the rest of my collection." She reached behind her and picked up something from a table. It was a large, rusty pair of shears. "These are perfect for trimming hair," she said, her smile widening. I didn't wait to hear another word. I turned and ran. I ran through the maze of rooms, tripping over dusty furniture and knocking over stacks of books. I could hear Bethany behind me laughing. I finally made it to the front door, fumbled with the lock, and burst out onto the street. I didn't stop running until I was a good 10 blocks away. I never went back to Yesterday's Curiosities, and I definitely unmatched with Bethany on Tinder. I even considered deleting the app altogether. To this day, I still get a little freaked out when I see antique shops, and I definitely have a new appreciation for normal, boring dates. A taxidermied squirrel wearing a top hat might be quirky, but it's also a warning sign. A warning sign to run. Far, far away. I blocked her number, her social media, everything. I even changed my route to work just to avoid that side street. And for a while, I kept having nightmares about being chased through a dusty antique shop by a woman with a pair of rusty shears. It took a while to stop looking over my shoulder. The worst part, I still don't know whose hair was in that box. And honestly, I don't think I ever want to know. I should have known better. I really should have known better. I mean, my grandma always said if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. But did I listen? Nope. I was too busy being flattered by a dude who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. And apparently, I left my brain at the door. It all started like any other stupid Tinder romance. I was bored, scrolling through profiles, swiping left on the guys who looked like they peaked in high school. Then I saw him. Liam. Tall, dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that could melt glaciers. His profile said he was a writer, which, whatever, sounded kind of interesting. We matched instantly, and he messaged me right away. He was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked for hours, every night for about a week. We had so much in common, or so I thought. He told me he loved old movies, hiking, and trying new restaurants, all things I was super into. He even sent me a song he wrote that I loved. I was hooked, line and sinker. So, when he suggested we meet up, I didn't hesitate. He picked me up in his vintage Mustang, which, looking back, should have been the first red flag. Who owns a vintage Mustang in this economy? Anyway, we went to this cute little Italian place downtown. The food was amazing, the conversation flowed easily, and he was even more attractive in person. He had this way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the only girl in the world. It was intoxicating. After dinner, he suggested we go back to his place to watch a movie. I hesitated for a second. I usually don't go to a guy's house on the first date, but he was so persuasive, and I was so caught up in the moment, that I agreed. His apartment was in this old, kind of run-down building on the outskirts of town. It was a bit weird, but I figured maybe he was just saving money, being a writer and all. The apartment itself was surprisingly tidy, almost sterile. There were no personal touches, no photos, no books, nothing that gave me any insight into who he was. Just a couch, a TV, and a coffee table. He put on some old horror film, and we sat on the couch. He put his arm around me, and I leaned into him. Everything was going great until I needed to use the bathroom. I went down the hall and opened the door and froze. It was not a bathroom. The room was small, and the air was thick with a strange, musty smell. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And on the walls, there were pictures. Not vacation photos or family portraits, but pictures of women. Hundreds of them. Some were candid shots, like they'd been taken without the women knowing. Others were posed, but they all had the same vacant, lifeless look in their eyes. I backed out of the room slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to get out of there. I walked back to the living room, trying to act normal. "Hey," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I think I should probably head home. It's getting late." He looked at me, his smile gone. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice suddenly cold. "Nothing, Elite. I'm just tired." He stood up and blocked the doorway. "Don't you want to watch the rest of the movie?" "No, I really should go," I said, trying to push past him. He grabbed my arm. "Why are you in such a hurry?" His grip was tight, and his eyes were hard and unfeeling. I knew then that I was in danger. I yanked my arm away and ran for the door. He chased after me, but I managed to get out of the apartment and into the hallway. I ran as fast as I could down the stairs and out of the building. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely get them in the ignition. I started the car and sped away, tears streaming down my face. I called my best friend, Sarah, and told her everything. She was horrified. She told me to go straight to the police, which I did. They took my statement, but they didn't seem to take it very seriously. They said they'd look into it, but I never heard back from them. I deleted my Tinder profile that night and haven't been on a dating app since. I still have nightmares about that room and those pictures. I can still see his face, the way he looked at me, the way his eyes turned cold. Now, whenever I think about dating, I get a knot in my stomach. Maybe I'll be alone forever, but honestly, that's better than ending up as one of those pictures on his wall. I still think about that, and I avoid dating. I have never gone on a date. It started with a picture of a dog, a golden retriever, all goofy grin and floppy ears. He was holding the leash, but you could only see his hand and a bit of his arm. I swiped right. I mean, who doesn't swipe right on a dog? His profile was basic. Loved dogs, hiking, and good beer. Seemed harmless enough. I was bored, freshly single, and craving some human connection that wasn't my roommate. So, when he messaged me, I replied. We chatted for a few days. His name was Mark, and he seemed genuinely nice. Not overly flirty, just normal. We talked about our jobs, our favorite trails, and, of course, his dog, whose name was Gus. He even sent me a full picture of himself. Decent looking, maybe a little too into the whole outdoorsy thing for my usual taste. But hey, I was trying to be open-minded. He suggested we meet up for a hike. Seemed like a good, low-pressure first date. We agreed on a trail just outside of town, one I'd been to a bunch of times. It was a popular spot, usually crowded, so I felt pretty safe. Plus, Gus would be there. What could go wrong? The morning of the hike, I felt a little flutter of excitement. It had been a while since I'd been on a date, and the fresh air and sunshine sounded like exactly what I needed. I packed some water, threw on my hiking boots, and headed out. I got to the trailhead a few minutes early. Mark was already there, Gus bouncing happily at his side. Mark looked different in person, bigger somehow. And his eyes, they were a bit too intense, like he was trying to stare right through me. I chalked it up to nerves. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual. Good to finally meet you. You too, he said, his voice a little deeper than I remembered from our messages. He gave me a quick once-over that made me feel a little uncomfortable. We started up the trail, Gus trotting happily ahead. The first part of the hike was pretty uneventful. We talked about the scenery, the weather, the usual getting-to-know-you stuff. But as we got further along the trail, things started to feel off. The trail got steeper, and the crowds thinned out. We were soon pretty much alone, surrounded by trees. Mark started asking me more personal questions about my past relationships, my family, what I was looking for in a guy. It felt way too intense for a first date. Then he started talking about control. He said he liked a woman who knew her place, who was submissive and obedient. I laughed it off, thinking he was joking, but he didn't laugh. His eyes were cold and serious. I'm not into that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm pretty independent. He stopped walking and turned to face me. Gus whined and nudged his leg. Independent women are a challenge, he said, a strange smile spreading across his face. But I like a challenge. I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. I knew I needed to get out of there. I think I'm going to head back, I said, turning to walk back down the trail. I'm not feeling so great. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Where do you think you're going? He asked, his voice low and menacing. I tried to pull away, but he held on tight. I looked around, desperate for anyone to appear. But there was no one, just us alone in the woods. Let go of me, I said, my voice trembling. He didn't. He pulled me closer, his face inches from mine. I'm not done with you yet, he whispered. That's when Gus snapped. He lunged at Mark, barking furiously, and bit his arm. Mark yelled and released me. Gus kept barking and snapping, keeping Mark at bay. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, back down the trail, not stopping until I reached the parking lot. I jumped in my car, locked the doors, and drove away, tears streaming down my face. I never saw Mark again. I blocked him on everything, reported him to Tinder, and spent the next few weeks terrified to go outside. I still have nightmares about that day, about his eyes, his grip, the feeling of being trapped and helpless. I owe my life to Gus. That dog, that sweet, goofy golden retriever, saved me from something I don't even want to think about. I hope he's living his best life, getting all the belly rubs and treats he deserves. He's a hero, and I'll never trust a dating app profile again without doing a serious background check. Next. The rain was hammering against my window, the kind of storm that makes the power flicker and the cat hide under the bed. Perfect night to stay in, right? Wrong. I was supposed to be meeting Jake. See, I'd been swiping on Tinder mostly out of boredom. My friends were all coupled up, and Netflix was getting old. Jake's profile was intriguing. He had that dark and mysterious vibe, all brooding eyes and black clothes. He said he was a collector of rare books. It sounded kinda pretentious, but also kinda cool. We'd been chatting for a week, and he seemed really into me. He was intense, yeah, but I figured that was just his personality. He'd suggested meeting at his place. Normally, I wouldn't agree to that for a first date, but something about him made me throw caution to the wind. He lived out in the country, a good 30-minute drive from my apartment. He said he preferred the peace and quiet. Now, looking back, red flags were flapping like crazy, but at the time, I just saw it as him being unique. I plugged the address into my GPS and headed out, the rain making the drive a white-knuckle affair. The directions took me down increasingly narrow and winding roads, past farms and fields that looked spooky even in daylight. Finally, I arrived at his place. It wasn't what I expected. I pictured a cozy cottage, maybe with a fireplace and shelves overflowing with old books. Instead, it was a huge, Gothic-looking mansion. Seriously, it looked like something out of a horror movie. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the overgrown yard was filled with creepy statues. I almost turned around right then and there, but I'd driven all that way, and a tiny part of me was still curious. Plus, I'm stubborn. I parked my car and hesitantly walked up the long, winding driveway. The front door was massive and made of dark wood, with a heavy iron knocker shaped like a gargoyle. I used it, the sound echoing through the silent house. After a moment, the door creaked open. Jake stood there, looking even more intense than in his pictures. He was tall and thin, with pale skin and eyes that seemed to absorb the light. He wore a long, black coat that made him look like a character from a Victorian novel. "You made it," he said, his voice low and gravelly. He didn't smile. He ushered me inside, and I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. The house was freezing, and the air was thick with the smell of dust and something else I couldn't quite place. The entrance hall was huge and dimly lit, with portraits of stern-looking people hanging on the walls. They all seemed to be staring at me. "I'm still working on the place," Jake said, gesturing around the room. "It's a bit of a fixer-upper." A fixer-upper? It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. He led me through a series of dark hallways to a room that he called his library. It was a large, circular room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The books were old and leather-bound, their titles barely visible in the dim light. There was a large fireplace in the center of the room, but it wasn't lit. "Impressive, right?" Jake said, his eyes gleaming. I forced a smile. "Yeah, it's interesting." He started talking about his collection, going on and on about first editions and rare manuscripts. I tried to act interested, but I was too busy trying to figure out how to escape. Something about this place, and about Jake, just felt wrong. He offered me a glass of wine, which I reluctantly accepted. He poured it from a dusty bottle that looked like it had been sitting on the shelf for a century. I took a small sip. It tasted weird. As he continued his lecture on obscure literature, I started to feel lightheaded. The room seemed to be spinning, and my vision blurred. I realized that I hadn't eaten much all day, and maybe the wine was just hitting me hard. "Are you all right?" Jake asked, his voice sounding distant. "I think I just need some fresh air," I said, standing up. He blocked my path. "Nonsense. Just relax. I have so much more to show you." He reached out and touched my arm, and I recoiled. His hand was cold and clammy. "I really need to go," I said, my voice trembling. He didn't move. His eyes were fixed on me, and his expression was unsettling. He looked hungry. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice now a low growl. That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. I pushed past him and ran out of the library, back into the dark hallway. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get out of that house. I stumbled through the maze of hallways, desperately searching for the front door. I could hear Jake behind me, his footsteps echoing through the house. I finally found the entrance hall and fumbled with the heavy front door. It was locked. Panic set in. I was trapped. I heard Jake getting closer. I turned around, ready to fight if I had to. He stood there, blocking the doorway, a strange smile on his face. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked. I didn't answer. I grabbed the heavy gargoyle knocker and swung it at him with all my might. It connected with his head, and he stumbled backward, momentarily stunned. I didn't wait to see if he was seriously hurt. I threw open the door and ran out into the rain. I ran as fast as I could, back down the long driveway, toward my car. I could hear Jake yelling behind me, but I didn't look back. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and finally managed to unlock the door. I jumped inside, started the engine, and sped away, leaving Jake standing in the rain, his face contorted with rage. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town. I pulled into a gas station, shaking and sobbing. I called my best friend, Sarah, and told her everything that had happened. She was horrified. I went to the police, but they couldn't do much without more information. The address Jake gave me was a dead end, a vacant lot. I deleted my Tinder profile, and I haven't used a dating app since. That night still haunts me. I don't know what Jake wanted, or what he would have done if I hadn't managed to escape. But I do know that I got incredibly lucky. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Trust your instincts, and never, ever, go to a stranger's house on a first date. The weirdest part? A few weeks later, I was browsing through an antique shop, and I saw a book that looked incredibly familiar. It had the same weird binding as the ones in Jake's library. I picked it up and opened it. Inside, there was an inscription. To my dearest Elizabeth, may you be bound to me forever. Elizabeth is my name. Next. Okay, here we go. It started with a pizza craving and a desperate swipe. I was home alone on a Friday night, scrolling through Tinder while debating whether to order Domino's or Pizza Hut. My thumb froze over a guy named Ethan. He seemed normal, maybe too normal. His profile was all hiking pictures and photos with his golden retriever. No shirtless gym selfies, no aggressive political rants. Just a guy, a dog, and a mountain. What the heck? I thought and swiped right. He matched instantly. We chatted for a bit, the usual getting to know you stuff. He worked as an architect, liked indie movies, and lived about 20 minutes away. Red flag bells weren't ringing, which, honestly, felt weirdly suspicious in itself. After a few days of texting, he suggested we meet up for coffee. I agreed, figuring it was low stakes and easy to bail if things got weird. The coffee date was fine. Ethan was exactly as advertised, kind, a little dorky, and obsessed with his dog Buster. We talked about our jobs, our families, and our favorite podcasts. There wasn't any crazy chemistry, but there wasn't any glaring awkwardness either. I left the date feeling indifferent, thinking I probably wouldn't see him again. But then he texted me the next day, asking if I wanted to go for a hike. I was bored and the weather was supposed to be nice, so I said yes. This time, Buster came along, which was a definite plus. The hike was pretty chill, just a leisurely stroll through a local park. Ethan seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, and Buster kept trying to eat my shoelaces. Overall, a pleasant afternoon. After that, things escalated quickly. We went out for dinner, saw a movie, even went to a local brewery with some of his friends. Ethan was consistently nice, considerate, and, well, boring. I know that sounds terrible, but after years of dating guys who were either emotionally unavailable or just plain crazy, I wasn't used to someone so stable. I started to wonder if I was settling, if I was just so tired of the dating game that I was willing to overlook the lack of fireworks. Then came the invitation to his cabin. He said his family had a cabin up in the mountains, about a 2-hour drive from the city. He wanted to get away for the weekend and thought it would be a fun change of scenery. I hesitated. A weekend trip felt like a big step, especially with someone I wasn't even sure I was that into. But he was so enthusiastic, and the idea of escaping the city sounded incredibly appealing. Plus, he promised Buster would be there. So I agreed. The drive up was uneventful. Ethan played some mellow indie music, and we chatted about everything and nothing. When we finally arrived, the cabin was even more charming than I expected. It was small and rustic, with a stone fireplace and a cozy porch overlooking a dense forest. Buster immediately started sniffing around, clearly excited to be in the woods. The first night was perfectly normal. We made dinner together, grilled some burgers, and drank a few beers by the fire. Ethan told stories about his childhood summers at the cabin, and I even started to relax and enjoy myself. That's when things started to get weird. It began subtly. Ethan started acting different. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He kept staring out the window, into the darkness of the forest. When I asked him what was wrong, he just shrugged and said he was tired. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to stress or maybe just cabin fever. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to find him standing over me, just staring. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the moon through the window. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel his eyes on me. "Ethan," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he turned and walked out of the room. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I lay in bed, wide awake, listening to every creak and groan of the old cabin. I kept expecting him to come back, but he didn't. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. He made breakfast, poured me a cup of coffee, and even cracked a few jokes. I tried to bring up the night before, but he just brushed it off, saying he must have been sleepwalking. I didn't buy it. The rest of the day was a blur of mounting anxiety. Ethan's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would disappear for hours at a time, wandering off into the woods without saying where he was going. When he was around, he seemed distant and preoccupied, lost in his own thoughts. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that I was just letting my imagination run wild. But the feeling of unease kept growing, gnawing at me from the inside. As dusk began to settle, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I told Ethan I wanted to go home. He didn't argue. He just stared at me with a strange, vacant expression. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll drive you." The drive back was silent and tense. Ethan didn't say a word, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I kept glancing at him, trying to decipher his expression, but his face was a mask. As we neared the city, he suddenly pulled over to the side of the road. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I need to show you something," he said. He got out of the car and started walking into the woods. I hesitated for a moment, then followed him. I don't know why I did. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was just a desperate desire to understand what was going on. He led me deeper and deeper into the forest, until we reached a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a shallow grave. My breath caught in my throat. "What is this?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on the grave. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver collar. It was a dog collar, and engraved on the tag, barely visible in the fading light, was a name, Buster. My blood ran cold. I backed away slowly, my eyes wide with terror. "Where is Buster?" I managed to choke out. Ethan smiled, a slow, chilling smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Buster is everywhere," he said. "He's part of the forest now." I didn't wait to hear any more. I turned and ran, stumbling through the trees, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear Ethan behind me, his footsteps growing closer. I ran as fast as I could, blindly, desperately, until I burst out of the woods and onto the road. I flagged down a passing car and begged the driver to take me to the nearest police station. I told the police everything, but they didn't believe me. They said Ethan was a respected architect with no criminal record. They said I was probably just stressed and confused. They said they would look into it, but I knew they wouldn't. I never saw Ethan again. I moved to a different city, changed my phone number, and tried to forget everything that had happened. But I never could. The image of that shallow grave, the sight of that silver collar, haunted my dreams for years. I still use Tinder, but I'm a lot more careful about who I swipe right on. And I definitely don't go on weekend trips to remote cabins anymore. I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the scariest monsters are the ones who seem the most normal. The notification buzzed on my phone, another Tinder match. Ugh. Truth is, I wasn't even looking for anything serious. Just some distraction after, well, let's just say a rough patch. His profile pic was all right. A little blurry, but he seemed normal enough. Liam, it said. Cool name, I thought. We started chatting, and honestly, he seemed kinda perfect. Shared my taste in music, loved hiking, even laughed at my terrible jokes. Maybe too perfect. But hey, a girl can dream, right? We talked for a couple of weeks before deciding to meet up. He suggested this really cool, kinda obscure bar downtown. It was a Tuesday night, and I figured, what the heck? It's not like I had anything better to do. Walking into the bar, it had this low-key vibe with dim lighting and a live band playing some bluesy tunes in the corner. I spotted Liam sitting at a booth, and even though his pics were kinda dodgy, he looked way better in person. Tall, with this relaxed smile that made me instantly feel at ease. We ordered drinks, and the conversation just flowed. We talked about everything from our childhood pets to our most embarrassing moments. He was a good listener, and he actually seemed interested in what I had to say. It was a good night, like really good. At the end of the night, he walked me back to my car. We hugged goodbye, and he leaned in for a kiss. It wasn't some super intense, movie-worthy kiss, but it was nice. Simple, sweet, and definitely promising. I drove home with this stupid grin plastered on my face, feeling like maybe, just maybe, things were finally looking up. The next few weeks were a blur. Liam and I went on a bunch of dates, hiking, movies, even a random trip to a cheesy amusement park. Everything felt easy, natural. He was attentive, thoughtful, and always made me feel like I was the only girl in the room. I started to let my guard down, sharing things I hadn't told anyone in years. He was becoming my person, my confidant. Then, things started to get weird. It started small. Like, he'd call me from different numbers, claiming his phone was acting up. Or he'd show up late to dates, saying he got stuck in traffic, even though he lived like 10 minutes away. I brushed it off, figuring everyone has their quirks. But then, the quirks started piling up. He started asking really personal questions about my family, my finances, even my daily routine. I chalked it up to him just being curious, wanted to get to know me better. But there was something in his eyes when he asked these questions, a glint of something I couldn't quite place. One night, we were at my place, watching a movie. I went to the kitchen to grab some snacks, and when I came back, he was on my laptop. "Oh, sorry," he said, looking flustered. "I was just checking the weather." I laughed it off, but something felt off. My laptop was closed when I left, and he definitely didn't seem like the type to be obsessed with the weather. Then, the real red flags started waving. I started getting strange phone calls, just silence on the other end. My social media accounts started acting weird, with random posts and comments appearing that I definitely didn't make. I tried to talk to Liam about it, but he just brushed it off, saying I was being paranoid. I started feeling like I was being watched, like someone was always there, just out of sight. I'd catch glimpses of a car parked down the street from my house, always the same make and model. I'd hear footsteps outside my window at night, even though I lived on the second floor. One afternoon, I got a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box. Inside, there was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my window while I was asleep. That was it. I was done. I confronted Liam, showed him the picture. He denied everything, saying I was delusional, that I needed help. But I saw the truth in his eyes. The same glint I'd seen before, only now it was darker, more menacing. I told him to leave, and I never wanted to see him again. He didn't argue. He just smiled, a creepy, unsettling smile that sent chills down my spine. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I called the police, showed them the picture, told them everything. They took a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. I felt helpless, terrified. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed. I felt like I was living in a horror movie. A few weeks passed, and I started to relax a little. Maybe he was gone for good, I thought. Maybe I'd scared him off. Then one night, I woke up to a noise downstairs. I grabbed the bat and crept down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I peeked into the living room, and there he was, Liam, standing in the middle of the room, staring at me with that same creepy smile. He didn't say a word. He just raised his hand, and I saw something glinting in the moonlight. A knife. I screamed and ran. I ran out of the house, down the street, as fast as I could. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station. They arrested him, finally. Turns out, he had a history of stalking women. He'd been using fake profiles on dating apps to find his victims. It's been a year since that night. Liam's in prison, and I'm in therapy. I still have nightmares, still jump at every little noise. But I'm alive, and I'm learning to trust again. Slowly. I deleted all my dating apps. For now, I'm done with all that. I think I'll stick to meeting people the old-fashioned way. If there even is an old-fashioned way anymore. Anyway, the whole thing really made me think twice before trusting anyone I meet online. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of finding the one. But sometimes, you just gotta remember that not everyone is who they say they are. Some people are just messed up, and it's better to be safe than sorry. Next. I swear, dating apps are basically designed to give you a heart attack. You swipe, you match. You think you're finally gonna meet someone decent. And then BM. Reality hits you harder than a ton of bricks. So there I was, bored on a Friday night, mindlessly scrolling through Tinder. I matched with this guy, Liam. He was cute, liked all the same movies as me, and his bio said he was a volunteer at an animal shelter. Total green flags, right? I thought so too. We chatted for a couple of days, and he seemed normal. Maybe a little intense with the compliments, but I figured he was just trying to be charming. He suggested we meet up at this new bar downtown, the Velvet Curtain. Sounded kinda swanky, so I was down. The night arrived, and I got ready, trying to look effortlessly cool. Jeans, a nice top, a touch of makeup, the usual. I arrived at the Velvet Curtain, and it was definitely swanky. Dim lighting, velvet booths, the whole shebang. I texted Liam, and he said he was already inside and would meet me at the entrance. A few seconds later, this dude appears. It was Liam, except different. His pictures made him look like a regular guy next door, but in person, he had this unsettling vibe. Like his eyes were too intense, and he was smiling way too much. He also seemed taller, like he was crouching in the pictures. But whatever, I thought. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. We went to the bar, and the night started off okay. We talked about our jobs, our favorite music, all the standard first date stuff. But the more he talked, the more uncomfortable I felt. He kept staring at me, not in a cute way, but in a way that made me feel like I was a bug under a microscope. He would compliment me over and over and over. It felt forced and too much. Then, he started asking weird questions. Like really weird. He wanted to know about my childhood, my dreams, my deepest fears. I tried to deflect, but he was persistent, drilling me with questions like I was on trial. He wanted to know everything. At one point, he even asked what I would do if I saw someone get hurt. I was getting a seriously bad vibe. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, needing a break from his intense gaze. I splashed some water on my face, trying to calm down. It's just a bad date, I told myself. You can survive a bad date. But something felt deeply wrong. When I came back to the table, Liam was gone. My heart started racing. I looked around, but I didn't see him anywhere. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam. Come find me. I have a surprise for you. Okay, that's creepy, I thought. I texted back. What surprise? Where are you? He didn't reply. I decided to leave. I was not about to play some weird hide-and-seek game with this guy. As I was walking toward the exit, I saw a bouncer standing by a door I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked away in a dark corner, and it had no sign or anything. Just a plain, wooden door. On a whim, I decided to ask the bouncer about it. What's behind that door? I asked. He looked at me, his face unreadable. That's the private lounge, he said. Members only. Something told me Liam was in there. I didn't know why, but I had a feeling. Can I go in? I asked. The bouncer shook his head. Sorry, miss. You need a key. I stood there for a moment, thinking. Then, I remembered something. Liam had mentioned that he was a member of some exclusive club. Could this be it? I think my friend is in there, I said to the bouncer. His name is Liam. The bouncer hesitated, then looked at me more closely. Liam, huh? Wait here. He went inside the door and was gone for a few minutes. When he came back, his face was pale. He's waiting for you, he said. But I have to warn you, miss. Be careful. I thanked him and walked through the door. What I saw on the other side still haunts me to this day. The private lounge wasn't a lounge at all. It was more like a dungeon. The walls were bare, the lighting was dim, and there was a strange, metallic smell in the air. In the center of the room was a table, and sitting at the table was Liam. But he wasn't alone. There were two other people in the room, both of them wearing masks. They were standing behind Liam, and they were holding knives. I froze. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear. Liam smiled when he saw me. "Ah, you found me," he said. "I told you I had a surprise for you." He gestured to the masked figures. "These are my friends," he said. "They're going to help us get to know each other better." I finally found my voice. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Liam chuckled. "Don't be scared," he said. "This is just a little game. A game of truth or dare. But the dares, they're a little more intense than you're used to." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Are you ready to play?" I didn't wait for him to finish his sentence. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, back through the door, past the bouncer, and out into the street. I didn't stop running until I was home, safe behind locked doors. I called the police, told them everything. They investigated, but they couldn't find anything. The private lounge was gone, vanished without a trace. And Liam, he disappeared too. No social media, no trace. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night. I don't know who Liam was, or what he wanted. All I know is that I got lucky. I escaped. Now I only use dating apps to look for friends and to check reviews. I'm done with that life. It started with a damn meme. Some stupid picture of a pug dressed as a taco, captioned, "Me trying to hold my life together." I swiped right because, honestly, who doesn't love a pug? And he swiped right back. His name was Ethan, and his profile was normal. Maybe a little too normal. Hiking pictures. A shot with his family at what looked like a graduation. Another of him, holding a fish almost as big as he was. He seemed like the kind of guy my mom would adore. I was bored, restless after a string of dead-end summer jobs, and feeling like my friends were all moving on without me. College applications were looming, and the pressure was starting to get to me. Ethan, with his wholesome smile and outdoors a vibe, seemed like a good distraction. We chatted for a few days. He was surprisingly funny, quick-witted, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked about music, movies, our families, our dreams, or lack thereof, for the future. He was good at drawing me out, asking questions that weren't just surface level. He seemed different. Then he asked me out. He suggested this little coffee shop downtown, a place I'd actually never been to even though I'd lived in town my whole life. It was called The Daily Grind, and it apparently specialized in obscure blends and artisanal pastries. Sounded decent. The first red flag, looking back, was that he insisted on picking me up. Said he wanted to make a good impression. I usually prefer to drive myself, just in case things go south. But I figured, what the hell? It's just coffee. He pulled up in a beat-up, cherry red pickup truck. It was older than me, probably older than my parents, but it had this kind of cool, vintage charm. He hopped out, grinning, and for a second, I was actually kind of impressed. He looked even better in person. Tall, with kind eyes and a mess of brown hair that looked perpetually windswept. The coffee shop was exactly as he described it. Quirky, cozy, and smelling strongly of freshly roasted beans. We found a quiet corner table and ordered. The conversation flowed easily. He was charming, attentive, and genuinely funny. I found myself laughing more than I had in weeks. He told stories about his childhood, growing up on a farm just outside of town. He talked about his love for animals, his passion for woodworking, his plans to maybe, someday, travel the world. Everything was going great. Too great, maybe. That nagging little voice in the back of my head kept whispering, "This is too good to be true." After an hour or so, he suggested we take a walk. "There's this really cool park just a few blocks from here," he said, his eyes sparkling. "It has an amazing view of the city." I hesitated. It was getting dark, and I didn't know him that well. But he looked so earnest, so genuinely excited, that I couldn't bring myself to say no. Okay, I agreed, but just for a little while. The park was smaller than I expected, more like a glorified patch of grass with a few benches scattered around. The amazing view was partially obscured by a cluster of overgrown trees. Still, it was peaceful, and the city lights twinkling in the distance were kind of pretty. We sat on a bench, talking softly. He told me about his grandparents, who had owned the farm before him. He talked about their love story, their hardships, their quiet, simple life. It was all very idyllic. Then he started talking about loss, about how his grandparents had recently passed away, within months of each other, about how he felt lost and alone, carrying on their legacy. His voice cracked, and I could see tears welling up in his eyes. I felt a pang of sympathy. I reached out and put my hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry," I said. "That must be really tough." He looked up at me, his eyes shining in the dim light. He took my hand in his grip surprisingly tight. "Thank you," he whispered. "It means a lot." And then his eyes changed. The kindness, the warmth, the vulnerability, it all vanished, replaced by something cold, something predatory. His grip tightened even more, almost painfully. "You know," he said, his voice now low and husky, "I feel like we have a real connection." I tried to pull my hand away, but he wouldn't let go. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I think I should get going." He didn't respond. He just stared at me, his eyes boring into mine. His smile was gone, replaced by a chilling, almost sinister expression. He started to lean in, his face getting closer to mine. I could feel his breath on my skin, cold and clammy. Panic surged through me. I tried to pull away again, harder this time, but he was too strong. I started to struggle, kicking my legs, trying to pry his fingers off my hand. "Let me go," I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. He didn't say anything. He just kept staring, his eyes growing darker, his grip tightening. Suddenly, a dog barked nearby. A woman walking her golden retriever had stopped on the path, staring at us with concern. Ethan flinched. His grip loosened slightly. That was all the opportunity one needed. I yanked my hand free and scrambled to my feet. "Stay away from me," I screamed, backing away. He stood up slowly, his eyes still fixed on me. He didn't say a word. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't stop running until I reached the main street, where the bright lights and the bustling crowds offered a sense of safety. I called a cab and went straight home. I locked the door, bolted the windows, and didn't sleep a wink that night. The next day, I blocked him on Tinder, on social media, everywhere. I deleted the app and swore off online dating forever. I never saw him again, but I still think about him sometimes, about those eyes, about that chilling, predatory stare. I still wonder what would have happened if that woman hadn't walked by with her dog. It was just coffee, right? Just a stupid meme and a harmless swipe. That's what I keep telling myself. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows are long, I can still feel his grip on my hand, still hear his voice whispering in my ear. And I know that some things, no matter how small they seem, can change your life forever. Okay, so, look, I'm not usually one to spill my guts online, but this Tinder story is just too messed up to keep to myself. It's not even like a haha, awkward date kind of story. More like a did I almost become a character in a true crime documentary kind of story. It started like any other conversation, you know? A few harmless messages, a couple of shared interests listed on our profiles, and boom. Instant match. His name was Chris, and his profile pics looked normal enough. A group shot with some buddies, a selfie hiking, and one of him playing guitar. He seemed like a chill dude, maybe even a little nerdy, which was honestly a plus for me. I'd been swiping for a while and was ready to give dating apps one more try. We talked about music, video games, and the usual get-to-know-you stuff for like a week before he suggested we meet up. He said he was a bartender at this dive bar on the outskirts of town, and it was his night off, so he wanted to grab some food at the diner next door. Sounded harmless enough, right? Public place, early evening, no pressure. I told my best friend, Sarah, where I was going, and even sent her a screenshot of Chris's profile. If I don't text you by 10 p.m., I joked, send the cavalry. The diner was your typical small-town joint, greasy spoons and all. Chris was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth in the back corner. He looked a little different than his pictures, kind of skinnier, and his eyes seemed a lot darker. But I chalked it up to bad lighting and my own nerves. He was polite, pulled out my chair, and we ordered our food. The conversation was okay at first. We talked about our jobs, our families, and what we were looking for in a relationship. But then things started to get weird. He kept asking me super specific questions about my apartment. Not just, do you live alone? But stuff like, what floor are you on? And how many exits does your building have? He even asked what kind of security system I had, which seemed totally out of left field. I tried to brush it off, saying I lived in a pretty safe neighborhood and didn't really worry about that kind of thing. But he kept pushing, like he was trying to find a loophole in my non-existent security. Then he started talking about my social media. He knew way too much about me. He mentioned a photo I posted from a vacation I took 2 years ago, a detail I'd completely forgotten. You looked really happy in that picture, he said, with this unsettling smile. Like nothing could ever go wrong. It was creepy, like he'd been scrolling through my entire online life, memorizing every detail. He knew about some of my old friends and some of my inside jokes. The food arrived, but I suddenly wasn't hungry anymore. My stomach was churning, and I could feel a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I thought maybe I was just overreacting, being paranoid. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but Chris kept circling back to my personal life, digging for more information. He asked about my schedule, when I usually left for work, when I came home, if I had any evening plans for the rest of the week. It felt like he was building a profile of my daily routine, mapping out my vulnerabilities. I started giving vague answers, trying not to reveal too much. But he seemed to notice my hesitation, his smile growing wider, more predatory. Then, out of nowhere, he asked me if I believed in fate. I said I didn't really think about it much. He leaned forward, his eyes locking on mine. I do, he said, his voice low and intense. I think we were meant to meet. I think I was meant to find you. That was it. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. My fight or flight response kicked into overdrive. I needed to get out of there now. I stood up abruptly, knocking over my water glass. I'm sorry, I said, my voice shaking. I have to go. I just remembered I have an early meeting tomorrow. Chris's smile disappeared. He stood up too, blocking my way. But we were just getting to know each other, he said, his voice now cold and menacing. Don't you want to see where this goes? I pushed past him, ignoring his words. I practically ran out of the diner, fumbling with my keys as I made my way to my car. I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. As soon as I got inside, I locked the doors and started the engine. I didn't look back. I didn't stop driving until I was back in my apartment, safe behind locked doors. I called Sarah and told her everything that had happened. She was freaked out, to say the least. She urged me to call the police, but I didn't have any concrete proof that Chris had done anything wrong. It was all just a feeling, a sense of unease. She stayed with me that night, and we went through all my social media settings, tightening up my privacy. The next day, I blocked Chris on Tinder and all my other social media accounts. I even changed my phone number, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I started seeing him everywhere, or at least, I thought I did. A guy who looked like him walking down the street. A car that resembled his parked across from my apartment. It was probably just my paranoia, but I couldn't help but feel like he was still out there, lurking in the shadows. A few weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address, just my name and address printed on a label. Inside, there was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken through my apartment window. I was sitting on my couch, reading a book. The photo was clear, crisp, like it had been taken with a professional camera. On the back of the photo, there was a single word: fate. I finally went to the police. This time, they took me seriously. They opened an investigation, but they couldn't find any trace of Chris. His Tinder profile was fake, his phone number was untraceable, and he didn't seem to exist anywhere else. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. I moved apartments a few weeks later. I never heard from Chris again. But every now and then, I still catch myself looking out the window, wondering if he's out there watching me. I don't really date anyone anymore. It's a weird feeling, never knowing when or how this story will end. This isn't what I imagined when I downloaded the app,